All right, welcome to the CXM experience. I'm excited today. I'm Grad Kahn, CXO at Sprinkler, and I am joined by someone who's become a really good friend of mine named Julio Silva. Now, Julio and I actually met at a dinner in San Francisco when he was the head of consumer analytics at Google. And he was doing some incredibly cool things around micro advertising and regional localization. And I've actually used a lot of his work that he was doing at Google with Sprinkler, with many, many other customers. And he's very generous with his time and sharing his insights. Since then, and more recently, he's now sort of a globe-trotting consultant working with a variety of CPG firms around the world. He's originally from Ecuador, is sort of based on the west coast of the US, but right now is actually speaking to us from Ecuador. So, Julio, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Grad.
And what's Ecuador like today? Is it a warm, cold, medium?
It's beautiful, like beach weather, almost 85 degrees, a lot of sun. Okay. Perfect for catching some waves.
Okay, well, we'll try to make this quick then, because so you can get out. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, Ecuador is a beautiful, beautiful country. So I just wanted to sort of start with someone like yourself. I would consider you one of the more innovative marketers in the world. And one thing that I think is really interesting about your career is what you've done is you've been able to focus on the new connected reality, and you're focused on trying to make sure that you're able to work with people in a way that's relevant to the world that they live in today. And very much a modern channels kind of person, very much a modern communications type of person. And what I love about what you're doing is you've got this incredible enthusiasm for it. You're always pushing the envelope and you're never really satisfied. And we'll kind of get to where you're going next in a few minutes. What I'd love to do is just understand how that all happened. So, a lot of the people who listen to the CXM experience are marketers, always kind of curious and interested in terms of how their peers have sort of managed their careers. So talk to me a little bit about maybe how you got started, what created the worldview that you have today, and what were the kind of steps that sort of led you to where you are at this moment? I know you've got lots of career ahead of you, but what are the steps that led you to this moment? And just kind of give us that story.
Absolutely. So my story is quite not traditional, I have to say, but my beginnings were sort of traditional. Right after college, I had the chance of doing an internship in the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., and I was doing traditional desk research. I was, helping with surveys, analyzing a huge offline research, the traditional market research analysis that has been done for several decades. But in that type of programs, I got first exposed to a syndicated consumer research. And I was introduced to a company called Euromonitor from London. They're very big in consumer research. And I was trying to replicate some of the research that I was conducting at the Department of Commerce, but to do it with corporations. And I did that for close to 1 year. Most of my projects and my research initiatives were done in South America. So it was another good excuse to go back home. And I was flying back and forth. And then eventually an Indian-based company reached out to me saying, hey, we've been searching this type of research that Euromonitor sells, and we're trying to do something with this thing called social media. And I think that, it might be something interesting. The company is called Genpact. It's a Fortune 100 firm. And I was recruited as a business development individual trying to use the social data to make some sense of consumer analytics and research. Early days. One of my first clients was Bank of America.
So what year would this be, Julio?
I'm talking about 2009, 2010.
Oh, early.
Yeah, it was very early.
Yeah,
Actually,
early.
A little bit after when Sprinkler was founded. So it was like around 2010, 2009.
Wow.
So one of my prospects was Bank of America, and Bank of America was a company that was within my portfolio of accounts. And long story short, the company was in the middle of the Occupy Wall Street crisis, the housing, the 1%, we hate the banks. And when I was trying to make this pitch, eventually, they invited me to Charlotte. I was in Charlotte, and when I was invited to have a final session, I thought that the deal was going to move forward. They say, hey, Julio, we will not like to, hire your company, but we'd like to hire you. would you like to
Hmm.
come and work with us as a contractor, as a consultant? And that was in 2011. And that's how I started. I remember it was just me, the need to actually find some sort of sense in terms of what were people saying or, commenting about the bank and their marketing initiatives around this like huge PR crisis. And hey, here's a password to a social listening, platform and technology. And that was it. That was my beginning. I started in crisis mode and doing reports, presenting that directly to the board. It was literally, a fast track exposure to something very, very important. And I started to get a sense of, hey, the traditional way of doing research can be enhanced with this like new unsolicited and unstructured way of capturing consumer data. And then eventually that moved into setting up a social listening practice at Merrill and Bank of America for using consumer research most broadly. And I had the chance, I was 5 years at the bank, and I had the chance of tapping into, traditional lending, high net worth banking, investment banking, small business banking, and
Very
everything in
cool.
between. So it was great, challenges like, hey, I would like to launch a credit card for college kids. How should I do it? It was the early questions that they needed to have some answers, and social media was a good way to finding such answers. So I was there for 5 years. Then I moved into Hilton. I was the head of social consumer research there, and I was working on some very interesting models that can use consumer mentions and forms to measure the connection with online booking. And for me, that was like an aha moment, because the first part of my career was like, okay, let's just measure and just try to understand the voice of the consumer. The second part was a connection to something more tangible, which was like money, online booking revenue. And that showed me that, hey, there's a way of using models and using data science in order to connect the two universes. I was there for 1 year, and then actually I went back to Bank of America for another year, and then I started having other roles in Disney. I worked at Cisco, doing a lot of consumer research and analytics. I was, my practice became more complex. I never played in the same vertical twice. So I had the chance of going from
Mm,
banking,
nice.
hospitality, then I moved to Hollywood, and then my next role after that was Deloitte. Then I started leading the entire team, and I was responsible of setting up a listening practice and be able to mine, in the case of Deloitte, consumer research in order to capture talent. And that was it in 2015. And that was when I was exposed to Sprinklr for the first time as a user. I remember that was the day that I was given the keys to the kingdom to actually understand how how the technology works, and it was a very interesting
Suddenly everything was different,
connection.
right? It's like,
Everything was
wow,
easier, actually
easier.
easier.
Okay,
And
easier.
I think that is the word. And then after I was in Deloitte there for 2 years, and then I was approached by Google and eventually started working on setting up their practice. And guess what? Sprinklr was the weapon of choice. And it was very interesting to me to see how the tool has been evolving throughout the years, and it become from a tool to a platform to a consulting arm to, a great partner to have within, corporate endeavors. And that said, in Google, I've been literally converging all the analytics and all the expertise for market research, the unsolicited information from consumers, silent surveys, and then getting into more of proactive and predictive analytics. So just trying to be ahead of the curve, understanding, trends, understanding the voice of the consumer, how it's structured. When an individual speaks or talks about a topic, there's a halo effect. There's a lot of elements that are left behind your DNA, your trail within social and digital, and it's publicly available information. And if you have the ability and the tools to mine that information, you can start building archetypes and eventually start connecting that with offline research and P&L, and that's when the conversation gets important. So I think that throughout the years, the challenge has been moving into more of a gimmick or something that is a nice to have to a more of a strategic and very, business oriented function.
That's right. Yeah, I think to me, what's happening today is that the smart businesses are now using modern channels as a way of driving growth. It's a growth and revenue motion, not a. I think there was a community management motion in the early days of let's listen and talk and exchange. Hey, that's nice to hear and that kind of stuff. But I don't think it's about community management anymore. There's an element of that, but really, it's all about how do I get to people where they are.
Absolutely. I really think that they're like Lego blocks, one on top of each other, and there's a greater goal, which is like build a brand or eventually, depending on the nature of your organization, have revenue, make money. And in order to do that, you need to get to where the actual pockets of value are, which are within the consumers. And community management is just an element, a touch point, an entry point, but the picture is way more complex than that.
Well, and I think that what I've seen happen over many years, I'm a real student of advertising and marketing history, is that when something new comes out, it's usually derided. It's like, radio, what the hell's that ever going to be good for? You can't see anything. You can't send in a coupon, right? And then TV came out and it was going to be a fad. Literally, people said, that's going to be a fad. And the early days of the internet, I remember showing my dad the internet, and he'd been one of the people that believed in TV when it came out, showed him the internet. And he's like, that's just a fad. That's going to be come and gone before you know it. It's like, all right. And it's just every single new thing has got this fad is sort of tapped on. And I'm sure somebody, some point in time said, hey, I've got this great idea. I can take this chisel and I can make these marks in this stone tablet. And everyone's like, stone tablets, that's just a fad. I'm writing. In fact, they're actually, all joking aside, there are some pretty interesting writings from, I think it was, might have been Socrates, on the dangers of writing.
Really?
Because at the time it was all oral history and oral tradition, oral education, and they were beginning to write things down and record them, and it was like, that's a terrible idea. We shouldn't be writing anything down.
You're leaving some proof.
So every single thing has got some critic standing on the side going, that's never going to work. Writing books.
And that's probably something very connected to human nature and how sometimes we're losing, the humble factor and just trying to, hey, everything has been developed and everything has been invented, but things are changing. If I compare how this industry was in 2009, 2010 when I started to what we have right now, and the potential of actually integrating this into board level decisions is something that if I talked to my younger self, it would have been like, you're nuts, it's impossible. But right now it's something very tangible.
Well, I think one of the things about the industry that's been interesting is that it started off from the beginning with the one-to-one piece. And I think what was always exciting about it from day one for all of us was, hey, I can actually talk to someone and know a little bit about them. I don't know everything, but I know kind of their interests, or I've got an ability to understand interests and sort of identity. But I think where a lot of the criticism came in, or the poo-pooing came in, was, well, there's no mass there.
Yeah.
Right. So you talk to 50 people I'm trying to sell 5 million chocolate bars or whatever. And what's changed, I think, over the last, decade is that the mass is there now. You've got billions of people literally on these platforms. And I think what Sprinkler's done is enabled you to suck in the whole mass and grab all those conversations. And then with the AI, be able to get down to the one-to-one level and be able to address them in a personalized way or semi-personalized way. But that was not obvious, I think, 10 years ago that would go that way.
Yeah, because it was going to be a fad. It's just like you mentioned.
It was a fad, right?
It was a fad.
Right.
But to be honest, I really think everything also relies in the context, because what you're mentioning, I think, is a half side of the spectrum. The other half of the spectrum is to understand if you're going to handpick or cultivate. Right now the word influencer is very big and very predominant. But if you don't have the right context in order to identify the potential, factor that individual might have, not only in the sheer number of followers or like high level metrics, but the way that individual is connected to the values or the interests of the audience that we're trying to tap into, then you might be, pulling your investment in the wrong influencer. You're a brand and trying to do some influencer program. So you need to do both, be able to identify your effective partnerships in order to understand the audience interest towards that particular individual, and at the same time, understanding how the masses and how, the big public can be reached in this more of a one-on-one type of way.
Yeah, very interesting. So as you're sort of looking back on your career to date, and now you're at a, I think, probably early midpoint in your career, what would you, if you were going to coach yourself up a little bit, say you could go, get a, I'll let you borrow my DeLorean and you can zip back 10 years. Okay. I think if you went back 10 years, you'd probably, here's my guess, is you're going to, well, first of all, you'll probably have a pretty fun time driving the car. Okay, so it's a pretty fun thing. So, but eventually you'll run out of gas, right? So you'll stop. Okay, and then then you walk out and you meet yourself. You meet your 10-year younger self. I think probably you'd say, "Dude, you're killing it. So keep going." Like that's probably a general. But you probably give yourself some advice. You're like, "Hey, try this earlier or do this differently or whatever." What advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, great scenario to actually put my mind around. I really think that one of the most important recommendations or advices I'll give to my younger self in this trip will be trust yourself. Make sure that you understand that the area that you're working on is not a fad. It's going to be very important moving forward. Start breaking silos. Integrated data sources. Make sure that your
Mm,
voice is
mm,
heard and that you're not seen as a gimmick. Social media is not only community management. Social media is not just posting a random tweet. Social media is insights, it's power, is the ability to identify trends before it happens. This is a very efficient and very effective way of understanding masses. So eventually you can be shaping your corporation. So pretty much trust your instinct, keep doing what you're doing, and break the silos. I think that's probably one of the most important advice that I'll pick.
that's very cool. Okay, now let's give more advice, but now we're going to give it to someone that you don't know necessarily. It's a new, a young student graduating from business school today. That student comes to you and says, "Mr. Silva, I really respect what you've been doing. I've been following it. I listened to this amazing podcast on the CXM experience the other day. I really wanted to know more." What advice would you give to someone who's just entering the industry right now? How would you direct them or give them guidance on where to go next?
I really think that the most important thing will be to identify what was your area of focus. Would you like to be on the strategic side? Would you like to be in the commercial side? I really think having those foundations are critical. But then at the end of the day, the basic recommendations, whether you pick, the one or the other, will be to try to understand the potential of consumer research. Try to get yourself
Mm,
into the weeds of understanding audiences, be an observant, be able to be humble and change, or don't actually know, be a daredevil, be actually someone that can go and try to break the status quo. If you're in a meeting, believe me, I've been in so many meetings in which, an executive or even a board member has a very, heavy position towards a subject. Always try to question that if data is not backing up that decision. If it's hunch driven, at least you need to have some backup. So try to always be that voice of reason and don't be afraid of voicing out that, there's a lot of unsolicited consumer information that we can go and tap in order to A, pick our strategy, or B, weight our hypotheses.
interesting. Love that. Okay, cool. All right. So you've been on this journey. You're still on the journey. What's next? What kind of what are you cooking up in the kitchen right now? And I know some of the recipes are secret. So I mean some maybe not quite, not really sure they're going to turn out. But like what can you share with us, and what can you kind of give us some insight into?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really think that in the future, making sure that the proper ROI models or the actual attempt to measure the effectiveness of this type of research will be paramount. So I'm right now working in several projects around the world to measure effectiveness of even visual analytics. So right now it's not only text, it's not only the voice, it's like, the way that people are expressing themselves. We're not longer just posting and writing, we're putting images. There's a lot of multimedia, and
Mm,
sometimes the wording and the way that we express ourselves in digital and social spaces is not connected to a text, it's connected to a visual. So what I'm trying to do is like integrate the listening, the traditional listening that has been fueling my research for the past decade, all the way to leveraging visual analytics. So that's one. Number two, I really think that the integration of trends, that are happening in search and social, and also the way that e-commerce and web are happening, or the CRM, performance of you're in a CPG, that's something that is extremely important. So if you're measuring and integrating that, I think that is something that is going to happen in the future. And last but not least, I really think that consumer research and this type of understanding of audiences is going to be the catalyst for brand development and brand building. Some of the strategies and the ideas that are behind major global corporations will be, based on the understanding of the consumer using social and digital data. So I really think that the area will bloom tremendously. If we fast forward, we'll go in the DeLorean, go back, to the future.
forward in time. It goes
Forward
goes both
time,
ways. Actually, you're
we
right.
can
It goes both ways.
if we go that way, we'll be able to see that probably the understanding of the consumers and the usage of this information for very high level strategic decisions will be a must.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the things that I've been sort of watching is the evolution of how the voice in modern channels is being expressed. And I'd say that the one very good example, and I think they've done an awesome job, would be Wendy's. I'm sure you're familiar with the
Yeah.
Wendy's, and I think they've done a nice job of getting a sort of a bit of a snappy, fairly interesting voice that you want to read. But what's interesting about that voice is it's a generic brand voice. It's not attached to an individual. Then there are other approaches, and L'Oreal and others are kind of going this direction, where you're talking to a human being inside the company.
Yeah, so sometimes those accounts are very very human. The humanization of
Yeah.
a is not a
Feels like
corporate
Zappos is
handle.
like that. Like Zappos, when people talk about how much they love Zappos, and then everybody does. I'm generalizing here, obviously, so I'm always a little bit nervous when I do that. But classically, they're usually gushing about an interaction they had with an individual at Zappos, right? So I called, and this person helped me, took the return, made it really easy. I was able to get the pair that I wanted. But they often refer to the human being behind it, and it's almost like, I'm not sure. I'm not enunciating this very clearly right now, but I want to bounce it off you, because you got the kind of mind that I think will be an interesting one to bounce this off of. It feels like there was this debate in the 1980s on house of brands versus branded house. Right, so Procter and Gamble or Nabisco be an example of a house of brands. Most people are aware of Tide and Cheer. Not everybody knows they're both made by the same company. And whereas a branded house would be something where, say, Johnson and Johnson is the brand, and then there's sort of sub products underneath that. And so I tend to think of Johnson and Johnson as the brand, and that's the branded house. And I feel like there's a similar, and no one really. There was I don't know why it was a debate, but it just kind of ended up really kind of fizzling out because it didn't really matter. Sometimes both work. But then where we're going now is like, I think, is it generic voice of the brand, or is it the personal voice of a human inside the company? And which of those approaches work better? Because I have a point of view on this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because I'm sure you've seen many iterations on this.
I'm really inclined towards the humanization of it and the, hey, let's be genuine. This is not a corporate robot, or like, the company does not have a soul. The company is made up of, talent, and that talent is expressed in this channel by an individual, taking charge of the communication. Therefore, the way that he's communicating needs to be personable, needs to be relatable, needs to be human. So I really think that is very extremely powerful. Like it's very, in some cases it can be humorous. It can be very, a very, fun to see, or like very real and genuine. And I think that probably can ease in some cases the burden, because a lot of these channels are exposed to a lot of hate, or a lot of pressure. So making sure that you're addressing the situation not with a copy paste corporate message, putting in a notion, is not the way to go. It's actually the opposite. Is trying to be understanding, empathetic, be able to connect that human component of, hey, we're representative of the firm, we're trying to inform, help, or like direct you in the right way, and just be approachable. That is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I agree with you, with a caveat. And I think the caveat is the amount of training required to make sure that happens effectively across the entire employee base. I mean, I don't think that training exists right now, or I don't know if anyone really knows how to do it. Maybe the best example in terms of this dichotomy because what I see is I see a lot of companies that have one approach physically and then a different approach digitally. And I think everybody knows that I don't know if I'm the world's biggest Disney fanatic, but I've never met anyone else who spent an entire year in the park. So I'm up there. Okay, I'm in the top 1% of the top 1% of Disney fanatics, and I am inspired and given joy by the Disney brand every single day. So I'm a huge fan. And what's interesting about Disney is I feel like they figured CXM out in 1955. Like, people keep running around talking about CXM right now and experience. Like, Disney had experience nailed, like in the 50s. It's a long time ago. And they understood the value of immersion. They used to have their own little newspaper in Disneyland. They had a Disneyland newspaper. They had, everyone was a guest, and the employees were cast members, and they understood this concept long time ago. And it's amazing actually how long it took the rest of everybody else to sort of copy and sort of follow their footsteps. But what's interesting is that Disney has figured out how to train their physical employees extraordinarily. Right? And, one thing I would do is I remember, like I said, I went to the park every day for almost a year, and I would just sit and watch. It was just amazing just to watch things. And you'd see very infrequently, but people would occasionally drop some litter on the ground. And it wasn't like left there for the litter person to pick up. Right? Anybody who happened to be walking by, could be a senior management person who's wearing a suit, or it could be, not the characters I don't think did this because they couldn't really see it, but it could be like anyone who was like a human, like not so much Winnie the Pooh, right? But all the humans walking around, anybody who saw that piece of garbage and was like essentially the first one that saw it would pick it up and put it in the garbage can. And I thought, wow, that is a really great culture. It's like everybody's responsibility to make sure the park is delightful. But what's interesting is that training and whatever they do, I've never unfortunately worked at Disney, although it was another one of my Disney and Ogilvy and Mather, the two places I wanted to work in my life. Never worked at either one of them. But the thing that's interesting is it's, I think, a lot more difficult to transfer that training that's worked so well physically to the digital world. Because in the digital world, the Disney brand is not individuals.
Got it.
And I'm not sure I've got a ton of great examples of the what you're talking about and what I'm agreeing with. And I'm curious as your thoughts on what's going to be required to like get people trained in the digital realm to interact in the digital realm to have the same impact that we've gotten pretty good at in the physical realm.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I really think that it relies on the environment in which you're operating. Your example of Disney is probably something that was embedded in the culture, but was finessed and was, executed properly because of the exposure. There were like definitely a lot of individuals seeing this type of dynamics and seeing the disruption to the ecosystem that a littering paper can do. Now that requires a lot of observation, a lot of engagement in the ecosystem. Now to the digital online world, there's a very interesting new field of study, which is the ethnography. The ethnographic analysis of online communities. So in order for me to go and engage as an individual the proper way, I need to observe. I need to understand because the way that individuals are behaving in digital and online sometimes can be a representation of the dynamics of the platform. So you might have an attitude towards the way that you communicate in LinkedIn. You might have an attitude or dynamic, the way that you communicate via Twitter, Instagram. And also you have different features and different, strong suits from each of the platforms that can leverage your persona. So you need to be, as a brand, you need to be able to identify, how is the landscape and what is the type of behavior or like even linguistic approach that you should take. So there's a lot of science behind that in order to do a proper observation will require dissection of the entire consumer behavior within the outlet, right. And then try to connect those elements, the strong suits of the platform, with your brand attributes and values and the things that you do offline to have a real genuine experience. Because this is 360. It's not that if I'm exposed to the Zappos experience, if I'm exposed to the Disney experience or the Nike experience, I'm expecting the same in all the angles of my exposure to the brand.
Right. That's a really compelling comment. You're right. The training has to include an understanding of the language and the gestalt of that team. When I'm talking to a developer, I'm going to have a very different conversation and need to than if I'm talking to someone who's a gamer.
You have to, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was super fun and super cool, and I really appreciate your time and your energy on this. If people want to follow you or stay connected to you, what's your preferred platform of choice? Do you have a Twitter handle, or what's the best way for people to stay in touch?
Yeah, of course. Like I have a Twitter. My handle is Julio_E_Silva, and you can add me up there. I'm not that active that much, but I'm a sort of a lurker. I engage with a lot of brands and study them, but I'm more active on LinkedIn. So you can find me just put Julio Silva, and you'll be able to see my face and my link there. And I'm always always welcome to receive requests for connections and also for advice or career advice as well, or corporate advice. More than happy to engage.
That's awesome. Well, Julio, thank you so much for being with us today. I want to thank Julio Silva, our guest, and we're talking about the future of communications and the future of where we're all heading. And you can bet that Julio will be there. So I'm going to sign off for now. For the CXM Experience, I'm Brad Kahn, CXO at Sprinkler, and I'll see you next time.